Okay, good morning to everyone and welcome back to our roundtable coordinated by Professor Barrett. And I wanna give my greetings to, sorry, to Professor Dagmar Strohmeyer of the the School of Applied Health and Social Sciences in Linz, Austria. I want to give my greetings to Dr. Kristina Chushak of the European Wergeland Center in Ukraine, and to Dr. Aidan Clifford of the Department of Education and Skills in Ireland. There should be also connected Professor Roberto Lagalla of the Sicilian Regional Council of Education, but I cannot see him yet. Yes, I know he has some acts in the regional government, because we have some little troubles about the Sicilian government, and he is involved in these activities, and so sorry for the delay. Alida, do you want to give some feedback us? Yes, because she's Alida Lococo, who is a professor at the University of Palermo, is in contact with Roberto Lagalla. Alida.
Sonia?
Yeah.
I'll try to keep in contact with the council.
Okay. So Martin, please, it's your turn.
Okay, well, we'll start and let's see if Roberto manages to appear. So anyway, I'd like to begin by welcoming you all to this round table, which I think it's going to be an extremely interesting and stimulating event. We have 3 and possibly 4 outstanding panelists with us today, each of whom has a very distinctive and fascinating perspective on issues concerning children's voice and education. One of our panelists this afternoon is Kristina Chushak, who you have already seen earlier today. As you saw then, she works for the European Wergeland Center, and the center itself is based in Oslo in Norway. She's substituting in this round table for Anna Perona, who's the director of the Wergeland Center, and it's Anna who's listed in the conference program, but instead Kristina, it was judged Kristina might be, you know, a better person given her experiences to sit on this panel. Now, as you heard this morning, the Wergeland Center, it's an education resource center which focuses in particular on intercultural education, human rights education, and education for democratic citizenship. The center was set up by the Council of Europe and the Norwegian government in 2008, and it serves all 47 member states of the Council of Europe. Now, the most important reason why Kristina is here with us is that since 2015, she's been the head program coordinator in Ukraine for the Wergeland Center School for Democracy program, which is supporting national educational reforms that have been taking place in Ukraine over recent years. And she's a member of a working group which is drafting the new national curricula. Now, in addition, Kristina, I've actually been working with her in recent years because she's a member of the Council of Europe's Educational Policy Advisors Network. And Kristina also works as an assistant professor of educational policy at the Lvov Region In-Service Teacher Training Institute. and she's also a research fellow with the National Academy of Science of Ukraine. One of our other participants in this panel is Aidan Clifford. Now, Aidan works at the Department of Education in Dublin in Ireland, the government ministry, and he's the department's official representative also on the Council of Europe's Education Policy Advisors Network. Now, Aidan is also a member of the Department of Education's Advisory Committee on Education for Sustainable Development, which, as you'll hear, is closely related to the reference framework. He's also a member of the Advisory Committee on Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts and Maths. He's a member of the board of directors of a number of organizations, including Educate Together, which is a network of 110 primary and secondary schools in Ireland. Aidan is also chairperson of the Irish Forum for Global Education and a member of the Dublin City Council Culture Company advisory panel. Now, as if this isn't enough, Aidan also represents the City of Dublin's Curriculum Development Unit on the Worldwide Global Schools Consortium, which supports global citizenship education in secondary schools in Ireland. Now, I'm also delighted, as said, Dagmar is professor at the University of Applied Sciences, Austria, which is in Linz in Austria. And she is also a professor at the Norwegian Center for Learning Environment and Behavioral Research in Education at the University of Stavanger in Norway. Dagmar received her PhD in 2006 from the University of Vienna in Austria, and the focus of her work is peer relations in children and youth, particularly with a cross-cultural and cross-national perspective, and her work has a special focus on immigrant youth. She has developed, implemented, and evaluated a program to foster social and intercultural competencies in schools, the VISC program as it's called, which has been implemented in Austria, Cyprus, Romania, Turkey, and Kosovo. Dagmar was also the principal investigator for the EU-funded project Europe 2038, which examined young people's engagement with the European Union in 7 European countries. Dagmar is also the recipient of numerous awards, including, for example, the Bank Austria Main Award for the support of innovative research, and she also received the University of Applied Sciences Award for Researcher of the Year in 2011. Dagmar also serves as editor of the European Journal of Developmental Psychology, and she's also the current president-elect of the European Association for Developmental Psychology. Now, our final panelist is Roberto Lagalla. Roberto represents, as you've heard from Sonia just now, he represents the Regional Council of Education for Sicily and Italy, and is a member of the 17th legislature of the Sicilian Regional Assembly. And since 2017, he has held the position of Councillor for Education and Vocational Training. Roberto originally graduated in medicine and surgery and then specialized in diagnostic radiology and oncological radiotherapy. He is a full professor at the University of Palermo, and he's the author of over 450 scientific publications. He was also president of the University of the Province of Agrigento from 2001 to 2006, and president of the Academy of Mediterranean Studies of Agrigento under the high patronage of the President of the Republic. Now, from November 2008 to October 2015, Roberto also held the position of Magnificent Rector of the University of Palermo. So this is our panel this afternoon. Can I just double check whether Roberto is here? No, Sonia's saying no. Okay, so in that case, could we perhaps go straight away then into your presentation, Christina, so that we can pick up perhaps on some of what you were talking about earlier this morning, and learn more about your very interesting activities in the Ukraine. Before you start, however, I'd just like to say to everybody, to reiterate something I put in the chat earlier today, and that is we would like this round table to be interactive. So while each of the 4 participants is going to give a brief presentation, they've been asked to keep their comments brief, and it's basically to present their own perspective on the issues that are the focus of this conference in general. So we'll learn about their particular perspectives, but then I'm hoping after they have made these brief presentations, there'll be plenty of time for you to enter questions into the chat function and for us to pick up on those questions that you would like to hear answered. So I know with an online meeting, it's all very impersonal and it's quite off-putting, and people do often feel very inhibited to put their questions into chat functions, but I would like to ask you all, please don't feel inhibited. Please just add your questions into the chat function while the 4 speakers are speaking, and then hopefully we'll be able to pick up on your questions, as many of them as possible, in order to have a genuine conversation with you, the audience, during this round table. Okay, so please put your questions into the chat function. Right, okay. At this point, then, I will hand over to Christina to offer us a few further words about her activities, particularly in Ukraine. Okay, Christina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I had the privilege of speaking to you for 15 minutes in one of the previous sessions. So I will try to be more concise, and I prepared only one slide to sum up things that are related to primary education and to actually working with young learners in Ukraine. We had, as I tried to show in my previous presentation, we have this, I think it's an advantage in a way, that we, since we are rebuilding secondary education, and in Ukraine, we can start with working by building a new normative basis. So basically, why RFCDC and civic education, developing civic competences for democratic culture is developing quite well in Ukraine is exactly because since teachers sometimes are a little bit reluctant to do things that they are not asked to directly in different documents. In Ukraine, we have this privilege of putting RFCDC, certain competences, certain let's put it this way, certain competences into normative documents. And when we are speaking about young learners, national curriculum for primary school was developed and adopted in 2018. And what is happening now is revision of preschool curriculum as well. As I mentioned in my presentation today, in Ukraine, we have slightly different systems. So actually, when we are talking about young learners, we talk about children who are going to kindergartens, preschool education, who are going to primary school, but also children who are already in secondary school. And current reform focuses on the fact that children in grades 5 to 6 are still young learners. So we have now 2 different cycles. One is grades 5 to 6 and the other is grades 7 to 9. So basically it's about all 3 cohorts or 3 different institutions actually in which children now study. So after the curriculum for school was adopted, there was a big movement in preschool education as well, that we need to change preschool education to prepare children better for this new school, new Ukrainian school. And last year, curriculum for preschool education was revised, and we are still hoping that it will be revised further to also include this sphere which is called child in the society, and this is basically where we with Vergeland Center and experts try to put more emphasis on civic competences, development of civic competences for children. So basically, it's good if you can, I think, if you can put these things into some normative documents, because otherwise it will be only domain for really engaged and really interested teachers. And also it's really important, and what we try to do is providing more detailed recommendations for teachers and how to implement things stated in normative documents, and providing teachers with more concrete tools how to do it. For instance, this certificate of achievements, which I mentioned previously, this was it looks like a simple document, but it took, I don't know, I think a year or something like that of different consultations, discussions, and compromises to write up this document. And what we were, and of course it's the problem, I think one of the problems was fitting more of civic education and more of RFCDC into curricula is that, you know, curricula is it's a limited resource, it's a limited space, so many different competences, many different actors, many different perspectives try to get more attention in there. So the choice of competences which were included in this assessment certificate was not maybe the best one from the perspective of someone who does civic education, but you know, all these state documents are big compromises. What I think what the emphasis was put more on two things. First is like more social part of this RFCDC, so cooperation, working in groups, cooperating together, then and self-efficacy. So these were three things which are included in the certificate, and also understanding of community, understanding of issues that are arising in certain community, and teaching children not to, well, from the very beginning to pay attention to these issues and to be part of the community and seek for solutions. So everything that today all these young children from the schools of the projects were presenting, so it basically goes in these very directions. So these parts were the parts which went into the certificate of achievements. And then, of course, very long and arduous work, which means translating all these documents into practical work in the classrooms. So teaching teachers, working with teachers, training teachers is a big and long process, and we are in this process now. So lighthouse projects are very important in this case. So what we could do in our program is to support these lighthouse projects, to make space for these lighthouse projects to appear. And what we are trying to do now in the program is to scale up and to present this, to present what we've learned to larger audiences. So at the moment we are working with schools that are piloting a national curriculum in grades 5 to 6. So we are kind of scaling up what we've done in our little projects with, well, not so little, but still projects with 62 schools. So this is a big possibility for us to, well, from practical perspective, to show how to implement these things further. And before it becomes a mass practice, I think we need to wait for a couple of years in Ukraine. But I think the dynamic is very positive. So in the beginning, this new Ukrainian school was met with big resistance, and now more and more teachers who are teaching in primary schools, they actually became ambassadors of this new Ukrainian schools, new approaches, this group work, this actually work well, project-based learning. So basically, from being resistant to changes, they see that these approaches are well suited for young children, contemporary young children. So basically, they are kind of promoting the cause to their colleagues who teach in secondary school. But still, yes, I think we still need to wait some time to see this for these things to become a really mass practice. That would be my my presentation, but I'm really looking forward for the questions because yeah. It's hard for me to focus. There's too many things going on. So if I have concrete questions, it would be easier for me to answer them.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Christina. Thank you so much for those words. No one's put a question in yet, so please bear in mind my words as the panelists are speaking. Right, so our next speaker in this panel is Aidan Clifford, and like Christina, I've been working with Aidan quite closely actually as a member of the Education Policy Advisors Network in Strasbourg at the Council of Europe, and Aidan has a very interesting perspective linked to ESD, Education for Sustainable Development. So Aidan, the floor is yours, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Just greetings from Ireland. It's great to be in the presence of such professional, imaginative and caring teachers, and also those who support the teachers in their process, and also to listen to the voice of the young citizens as co-creators of society. And I'll be going into that phrase later on. I'm here to talk about the link between the reference framework and educational sustainable development, and indeed education itself. While preparing for this, oh, I'm not moving on for some reason. Oh, it's going that way. Okay. I came across two quotes, one from the early 20th century and the other one from the early 21st century, talking about interconnected, and the other one about interrelated. And I'm combining that with two other words, interdependence and universal inclusivity, which are really the four words that highlight the direction of my presentation. Martin has shown us this famous butterfly a few times. I'm actually going to change the butterfly into a real butterfly and start to move and to try and find out where does the reference framework fit within the education landscape. Does it fit in, say, over in the humanities, or somewhere like that? Or if we were talking to another teacher who was unfamiliar with the project, would they put it into a very niche area, away, hidden on the side? Of course, the real question that arises, and today I'm going to be asking three questions, one of which is where does the reference framework fit within the education landscape, but what is education itself, and do we have a shared understanding of that term? Because that influences how we can answer these questions. So moving on, we can see maybe that the butterfly representing the competences would occupy possibly a much more significant space. I tend to would locate it in somewhere in that area, not in the central position, because everybody wants to stay in a central position these days for everything. Everything that seems to be important. I've decided that I won't hog the center. But it really depends on what the personal understanding of a teacher, student, parent means. They may place that in a different location. I would go slightly further and say that it also, because of the fact that it is dealing with a culture, so we have specific competencies, but the implementation of those competencies affect a much wider area than as defined earlier. Again, before maybe going any further, I think we should maybe take a quick look at the same idea with the education for sustainable development. And by that I mean global citizenship education, environmental education, or some of the areas associated with the SDGs as well. So within that, I've came across, this was my best visual I could find that would represent what would there I see, and we came across a little butterfly there as well. But our question is trying to find out how relevant that image is within the education landscape. And again, I've tried to simplify this statement saying that education for sustainable development it develops relationships and competencies that secure the well-being of humanity and the living planet. All the time I'm attempting to try and reduce complex areas down to single sentences, a hard task to do. But in this field of education and sustainable development, there's such a lot of literature that you can be overwhelmed. It is worth noting, however, because over the next few years, education for sustainable development will become more and more relevant in terms of any discussions around education systems. Most recently, in May of this year at the UNESCO World Conference on ESD in Berlin, they issued what's called the Berlin Declaration. And the basic idea behind that was to ensure that ESD is a foundation element of all our education systems at all levels. Now, this is very significant because I think there is increasing feeling that we're not moving fast enough. Interestingly, through the text of the declaration, I just picked out some key words like cognitive skills, social and emotional learning, action competencies, the crucial role of teachers, talking about redesigning our society, democratic decision-making, respect, well-being. You see the words that I've highlighted, but you'll find out those are all can be linked directly to the competence for a democratic culture. So yes, there is a definite link between the two, and I'm putting our little butterfly right in the center again there. But also, because I think it also has a definite unique space, I also have it in place. So you'll see 3 butterflies there with apologies. It's not clear, just maybe you might be looking for 1. However, the other question as well, going back to the one on education, is education about well-being? And indeed, is it about well-being of our individual selves, of others, and of the environment? Is that a way of a useful way of defining it? Another dimension to well-being, I associate well-being with positive relationships. And it's in that context, I'm moving and by the way, I've introduced some people in the background here. It's not all as an individual and as a collective group of people to represent this space. So getting to the core of the education, I think it's very useful to look at education as a process of developing positive relationships from a pragmatic point of view. And what emerges when you do that is you can ask questions like, as a learner, what is my relationships with English, for example, and how can I improve that relationship? For a teacher, then I ask the question, what competencies are needed to help improve a person's relationship with music, say. So it's just another way of looking at it. There is an intimate link between a relational perspective and a competence perspective. And you may notice my early document in the first slide. It reminds me of the link between the dual nature of light, being a particle and being a waveform. Moving back into the competences, again, just to lay emphasis on the value of the competences, they open up possibilities for individualized learning, increasing pedagogical precision and learner achievement. They are identified beforehand, which is an important element. And from the Council of Europe Volume 1 book, there is a reference to having a shared language enabling all concerned to teach, learn, and assess with transparency, coherence, and comprehensiveness. So that's another characteristic of the competences. The focus is on specific capabilities that are measurable and observable, and there is also the value of alignment with international standards and accountability. Before I leave this page, I just noticed I just put down here the letter to the next generation. I'm conscious that we were our young citizens were talking about that. Well, I actually view the curriculum as a humanly constructed document, which in the form of a covenant, in fact, focused on the well-being of a forthcoming generation. And it is like a letter to the next generation. Finally, my last slide is where I've tried to bring it all together, all the concepts, and that's maybe how I would see how they all interrelate with one another. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Aidan. That's a wonderful broadening out, I think, into other associated areas and other initiatives like ESD that are really important and are taking off at the present. Well, the ESD has actually been around in UNESCO for a decade or more, but of course, at the present time, it's gaining more and more salience and importance. So thank you very much indeed for making that connection. Now, I'm glad to be able to say that Roberto has been able to join us. He had difficulty getting into the Zoom call. He is now with us, I believe. And so could I ask Roberto to—
Yes, I'm here. Good evening.
Excellent, thank you.
So, thank you very much indeed for your kind invitation to this important meeting. I have the pleasure to address you the welcome of the appreciation of the Sicilian government, in which I am at this time the Chancellor for educational activities. And I am also the former rector of the university in Palermo, and so my friendship with Professor Ingoglia and Professor Lococo is very ancient in the time, but they are young at all the time. Only our friendship is ancient, and so they presented me your project, and I was very agree with the topics of the same project, because I think that the pandemic town is perhaps a chance for all of us to change some paradigms and some methods, such in teaching, such in learning. And in Sicily, we need a lot this changement, because the social situation is very differentiated in the country, and many young students leave the school before they have concluded the good time for studies. So we are efforting a special plan to join them and to support them to conclude, to finish the correct time of school. And but I know also that pandemic time has given us new aims, new topics, new strategies, and the school will be able to change the present methods, the present parameters, and go towards the digital green and blue transition. So this your roundtable, your activity is very important for us, because you can help us to support this regional and this strategic plan. I am sure that my dear friends will support us in this political and in this particular political strategy that is now at the middle of our interest in government. At this time, at the present time, we have invested more than 120 million euros for extraordinary activities to support the school and to renew the method of learning and teaching. So with these aims, I am sure that you will work very well in the context of Erasmus initiatives, and I'm sure that internationalization of scientific activity, but also the exchange at international level, are very important for the present and most for the future of our schools. So welcome, thank you very much for your work, and I hope to be with you again in the future. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed, Roberto, for that very interesting perspective. Really appreciate it, and for you fitting in to this very frantic timetable, into your frantic timetable of other activities. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
you. I will now pass the floor over to our fourth and final panelist, who is Dagmar Strohmeyer, which is last but by no means least. Dagmar, can I pass the floor over to you now to make your brief presentation? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I try to get this. So I hope that you can see my slides now. Are you able to see my slides?
Yes, we can see them.
Perfect.
Thanks,
so as Martin has already mentioned, I am a developmental psychologist, and I would like to share my insights from a developmental perspective with you. So my focus is on what can we learn from developmental psychology regarding the framework, and also regarding how to foster intercultural and democratic competences, with a special focus on rather young children, because your project, of course, was in primary schools. Before I will share my perspective with you, I want to emphasize that I really believe that this topic of fostering intercultural and democratic competences is, in my opinion, one of the most important topics of the future, because for me, if I would say there is one essence of these competencies, it is the competence that people all over the world need to collaborate, because we will face, we are currently facing, and we will face even more global challenges as humankind. So this is a very, very important competence, learn to collaborate with all kinds of different people. And in my opinion, the pandemic really is the first global test, actually, how well we are able to understand as humans each other needs, also whether we are able to coordinate our perspectives and our behavior, and whether we are able to share knowledge, skills, and resources. I think that the pandemic showed that in principle, humankind is able to behave in that way, but of course there is a lot of room for improvement, and I believe the future challenges, especially in my opinion, climate change, but also the rising social inequalities, they will make these competences even more important. So I really believe it is, for me, it's rather in the core of the educational spectrum than on the side, the butterfly we saw before. So you know all this framework, and now I just want to share you the perspective of developmental psychology and how these domains, these 4 domains, are related with the development of young children. So in my opinion, the value aspect, that is the very important ground of everything else, is absolutely closely tied with moral development. So moral development is a very interesting and large research field in developmental psychology. And basically, we are asking the question in this field, how humans, especially children and adolescents, come to the understanding that something is right and wrong. And it's not only that we are interested in the judgment of whether something is right or wrong, but also in the justifications. So if we put this as a concrete example, for instance, a core competence of the framework is the question whether it's okay or not to ignore the opinion of somebody else. And according to this framework, of course, it's not okay, because in a democratic society, we want to hear everyone's opinions. So in general, we would wish that all of our children and all of our people are able to listen to the opinion of somebody else. However, from a moral development perspective, this is absolutely not a straightforward thing, because there are so many competing arguments. So for instance, if I argue with empathy, I would rather say to ignore a person's opinion is wrong because the other person would be sad. So this is clearly an empathic reasoning. Or I can have a moral stance, then I would say it's wrong because everyone should be listened. So this is what children usually say who have an empathic or a moral reasoning justification. But there is, of course, also the opinion that it is maybe right to ignore the opinion of somebody because maybe this person would destroy the group harmony. Maybe this person is really a person who is not nice. We don't want him or her in our group. So it's better to ignore this opinion. Or we could also say this other person is not our friend. So what we can learn from developmental psychology is that just this extremely easy question whether something is right or wrong is extremely complex, and the developmental task and what children are learning already in primary school is to coordinate and to balance these different arguments. So in each and every situation, this needs to be balanced, and then a decision needs to be made. And usually there are pros and cons for both sides. The second important domain of development is cognitive development. I think this is closely linked to the attitudes part of this framework. And there are so many, of course, questions we can ask when talking about cognitive development, but applied to our topic today, we could ask, or children could ask themselves, is it relevant that my friend Aysun's parents were born in Turkey? So is it in this situation where I am now encountering with my friend Aysun, is it at all a relevant information? Maybe not, because the topic is something else and it's absolutely not relevant. And the second thing, of course, that we are also asking, or unconsciously what children are reasoning, is the value aspect of this thing, whether it's positive, neutral, or negative that Aysun's parents were born in Turkey. So what we have here is basically the social categorizations and how they get salient in a particular situation. Maybe in some situations, being from another country is absolutely not salient and fully unimportant. And the second thing here is also the more prejudice side of the cognitive development, if I have this feeling that it's something negative, and if it's a very strong feeling and it's not so easy to be changed, maybe even not by evidence, then of course I will perceive this very negative. Even maybe Alison is really a nice girl. So of course, situational cues trigger the relevance. There is a lot of literature on this topic, and that is especially important being a teacher. I think here the role models cannot be underestimated. So if you as a role model believe that being from another country is something positive and you behave in that way, this will also influence how your children in the classroom see, for instance, this particular immigrant girl. And again, the developmental challenge is the coordination and the balance of these complex processes that are operating together, like everything is operating together, because we are dealing with a very, very complex phenomenon. The third thing, it's related to the skills aspect of this butterfly, is the social development. So I believe that, of course, skills, we have a lot of sub-skills, but maybe one of the questions we could ask, and that is the thing I personally would try to foster if I would be a teacher, is it possible, and are my children in a multicultural classroom form intercultural friendships or not? Because of course, already in kindergarten, children develop basic communication skills, cooperation skills, and also conflict resolution skills. And it would be, of course, very good for intercultural competence if these competencies are developed in an intercultural relationship, in a friendship ideally, because there the children learn the most. But of course, intercultural friendship is not so easy to be formed because you need to have an opportunity. So this is the basis for everything. So if I'm in a classroom where there is not one immigrant or there is no one from another cultural background, how can I find an intercultural friend? My environment is so constrained, then I'm not able to. And then, of course, if there is a possibility, maybe it's extremely important how the teacher is able to shape the quality of the contact. So this comes from social psychology literature. So if there is a norm that authorities, teachers like to have intercultural friendship, if they perceive those two children as equal, principally equal, if there are common goals like group work, and if there is cooperation in the didactic, then it's much more likely that intercultural friendships will occur. So again, another extremely complex development field and also competence field, of course. The last one of the butterfly, this is knowledge and critical understanding. I would relate this to identity development, because I believe also that this is usually gets more salient when the adolescent, when our target group is adolescent. So of course, identity questions get extremely important in adolescence. So the question then would be that we ask ourselves, and the young people ask themselves, what kind of person do I want to be? And related to that is also the question, what kind of world do I want to live in? And everyone who knows adolescents well know that they are really asking this question and they search answers. And of course, why is it in adolescence? Why? Because there are these biological changes and also brain maturation. There is a lot of literature on that, but also because the life forces adolescents to make a lot of choices. So for instance, they need to decide their future education, they need to decide occupation, they need to decide romantic relations, etc., etc. So that is the reason why adolescence is so crucial for these questions. But for immigrant or minority children, these questions are salient much more earlier. So even already in primary school, because of course these children know that their family comes from another country, and therefore their cultural or ethnic identity is something extremely important. So we can expect that for the non-immigrants, for the majority group, this is rather a topic of adolescence, but for the immigrant and minority children, this is already a topic in primary school. So, and the skills and this acting out, like political and civic engagement thing, is of course also a result of an identity process that is going on together with the actions. So to summarize, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit long. So I believe that developmental psychology really offers plenty of arguments why it is absolutely meaningful to implement this framework already at an early age. So I would definitely advise any policy person to do this as early as possible. I think it's a very, very good idea to integrate this framework in national curricula, because only then we can really ensure that it is rolled out on a large scale. I believe that the teachers are the key people, the key persons during this implementation process. So all the teachers who are here, thank you very much that you engage in this extremely important topic. You are the key changers. You will make the difference to the future. And of course, also teacher trainings need to be offered. And from a scientific perspective, there needs to be studies, what also Harriet Tenenbaum has presented this morning, because of course, everything that is done under this framework should be evidence-based. And maybe we also need to find out what works very well, what needs to be improved, maybe what is not a good idea. So it's a mixture, of course, between practice and research, so that these competencies can be taught and that we can learn from each other. Thank you very much for your attention. And Martin, thank you very much for inviting me to this very nice group of panelists.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Dagmar. I should perhaps tell the audience I'm a fellow developmental psychologist, and you know what Dagmar is saying makes a great deal of sense to me. Now, there are no questions that have come in from the audience. You're being very shy out there. However, there is one question while panelists were speaking, a question that's come in from Nora Viam to me directly, and this is a question specifically for Aidan in the first instance. And Nora says the positive relational aspect of education sounds very interesting. Can Aidan go a bit more into it? How can this relational aspect be assessed and advanced to promote the well-being of pupils and students? Aidan, could you possibly have a stab at addressing that question from Nora? Thank you.
Yeah. The best way I see this is it's like the Tau symbol, that you could bring some elements of that into looking at competencies, but in this sense, it's at the other. My best way of describing this is it's like the idea of the wave nature of light. There's a particular. It's both a particle and also a wave, and there are two dimensions. We can atomize our education system into components and then break those components down and query it. And you will go through hundreds of different competencies that are needed to describe the whole education system. My attempt is to go in an equal and opposite direction as we develop the competencies method, to also go back and ask what are the fundamental, what is education about as a fundamental question. So the answer really is this, that yes, when you're talking about a relational element, it isn't open to analysis in the same way as you would with a competency model. But there are certain competencies that could be brought into play that are focusing on relationships. So it is a bit more complex to answer this question. But there is one thing I would like to say. The relational model, it brings in a few factors. It brings in the idea of what could be the case where, in terms of where we will go, but a competency model really determines it in advance. In other words, the competency, the standard is accepted as something that is analyzed in advance. And in other words, it's something about what we could be, or what we should be rather, and what we are when we analyze it. The relational model brings in a third dimension, which is what we could be, an imaginative unknown space. And that's an important area as well in terms of creativity and all that side of things. But there is a space for competencies to be idealized that could focus on relationships. They are already there actually within the reference framework, but not in the way I'm looking at things. Yes. Sorry, I can't give you a clearer answer to that because it is a complicated question.
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Aidan. I'm getting lots of questions coming into me directly. I mean, there's actually a lot of interest here, I think, in what Christina was saying. I think because of the scale of what you've been doing in Ukraine. Okay, there's one that I think you will definitely be able to say something about. Can we think of other ways to implement the RFCDC other than schools so we can expand its reach? And I think you've actually got a lot that you can say in response to. Actually, before you start, Christina, can I just ask Sonia, is there enough time to steal a little bit of time from you after 1/2 the hour? Because otherwise we're going to run out of time. Can we take an extra 5 or 10 minutes for the panel? I think that'd be very helpful. Yeah, okay, thank you, Sonia. Thank you. Okay, Christina, other ways other than schools?
Yes, this is a very good question. Thank you. I just want to quickly say to Vasilka Kolovska that, of course, all of these efforts would not be possible without translating the 3 volumes into Ukrainian language. And there was a small project by Council of Europe when, I don't remember, 2017, I think. So with the help of that little grant and with the help of EWC support, we did manage to translate it into Ukrainian, and it was endorsed by the ministry. There was a big presentation with current minister there present. So it is definitely essential to have this document in native language, because if you want to reach out to more than academic or super interested, highly qualified professionals, then you need to have it in your language. And we try to use.
Sorry, Christina, could I possibly just jump in at that point and just say something more generally about the issue of translation? The translations are being done of the reference framework in a variety of ways. Sometimes it's through an official route, such as the Wergeland Center, for example. Another route is for the ministry to actually take it on within the country. Sometimes it's being done by the Council of Europe's own translation department, and I don't think that's necessarily the most satisfactory way, because they're professional translators and you don't always get the best translator. You need education specialists to really be involved in the translation. Another way that the reference framework is being translated is by enthusiastic individuals out there in a country who wish to translate it. And if there is any volunteer here in the audience who would like to translate the reference framework into your language, please contact me after this conference and I would put you in contact with the Council of Europe Secretariat. I've done this for some of the translations, and we can then discuss that it is education specialists that actually do the translation rather than professional translators. Okay, Christina, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. Because we actually had an Erasmus project where we were using RFCDC out of schools. in this project, we were working with youth workers and with institutions who work with youth but are not formal education institutions. So different youth centers. Well, we have this post-socialist or post-socialist centers. Which I don't know if they are relevant for other countries. So big institutions which are basically working with the young people outside school, with offering them different ways to spend their free time in a constructive way. So we were trying to exactly bridge formal and non-formal education, because if there should be a common understanding or at least a dialogue about what are civic competences and how we develop them between these two spheres. And what we also managed to do, there was again I think in 2018 there was a new document being drafted, kind of a concept of civic education, the development of civic education in Ukraine, which covered the formal, non-formal education, adult education, so all spheres of education. So we also managed to smuggle in some competences from our FCDC into that document, which gives us a ground to also to persuade youth workers that they should work more with critical thinking, that it's not only. The problem of Ukraine is that for years civic education was related to bringing up young children in the spirit of patriotism or something like that, or kind of learning folk roots or folk traditions. So it's been a big issue for a couple of years for youth workers and for educationals who think otherwise to convince that critical thinking, cooperation skills, analytical thinking, all these things are equally important for bringing up young citizens. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to cooperate with non-formal education, and it works. It's basically whenever you have time to work with a group of people who work with young people for some time, it's not an issue of one webinar or two webinars. You need kind of access to these people for a longer period of time. The way we work with them with several projects is an introduction of our RFCDC and then working on concrete practical ways of implementing and trying out, coming back, reflecting what was successful, what was not, and then coming back to our FCDC with deeper understanding what is because when you just first introduce the model, it seems too theoretical or too obvious sometimes to people. Only when you start working with descriptors, with really planning, teaching people to plan concrete learning activity, which has a very concrete learning goal, learning outcome, only then it starts to work. And it doesn't matter if it's preschool, school, or non-formal education. I think it's all the same, and it's really great that this the framework was conceived as an instrument which gives a common language, common understanding. And I think in our case, it really helps in that way. So it becomes, so in Ukraine, definitely people who work in non-governmental organizations and are in civic education who are more related to formal education, they at least have very similar now language, at least even. So that really helps. I'm not sure if that was what the question was about, but.
Yeah, no, I think that's excellent, Christina. Thank you. Yeah, this is one of the interesting things that keeps coming up, how the reference framework now provides a common language. That's a phrase that one hears repeatedly at Council of Europe events from people within the different member states. Right, there's a question here for Dagmar that's come in. Dagmar, the question is there a questionnaire or a tool that considers the competencies in these four wings of the butterfly in relation to moral, cognitive, social, and identity development? Would you be able to say something about that question in response to that
Yes,
question?
I believe there is a questionnaire actually, and I think it was developed even in this project by Harriet for this evaluation study. So I would consider her questionnaire or of this team as one first attempt to cover the competencies of the framework. And as I remember from her talk from this morning, of course, because values were covered there, moral development was covered, and all the other aspects I don't remember besides the values, human rights, she mentioned. So I think that Harriet would be a good address to ask for this questionnaire, but for sure there is also for future developments, there is room to be creative, because I believe we need more than one questionnaire, and it's for sure possible to develop new questionnaires based on the framework, and it should be done by many groups in the future. But Harriet is my first address. I would ask her.
Thanks, Dagmar. Can I just follow that up with another question to you from me personally? And that is, you know, I'm a developmental psychologist by background, but I've now for the last 15 years found myself working in mainstream education, basically. And there is this issue of interdisciplinary collaboration and how one can maximize the input. There are these pockets of knowledge in different social science disciplines, all of which can be relevant to an activity like citizenship education or intercultural education. Do you have any ideas about the practical steps that we can take to maximize that sort of contribution from other disciplines? Or what do you see are the obstacles, the impediments to us actually importing ideas from different disciplines into education? And whether you can think of ways to overcome those sorts of obstacles. So a nexus of questions around interdisciplinarity, but with education at the center and as the focus.
Yes, I'm a developmental psychologist by training. I work in a social work department, and I'm affiliated to the educational group in the University of Stavanger in Norway. So I believe that it's really not easy to collaborate cross-disciplinary, because we really need to learn each other's languages. So I believe that I would always opt that projects should be interdisciplinary, but it's not possible to be so quick if you have an interdisciplinary team, because you should structure the process as an intercultural adventure, because you need to learn each other languages and maybe even to resolve a lot of conflicts or misunderstandings, because of course disciplines operate differently. They also have different publication practices. Maybe they value different kind of things. And I believe it's really the best would be to find fully open-minded people who are willing to join this kind of adventure where you don't know the result when you start, and then take enough time for the process and see it also as a translational exercise. So of course, the important thing is that such projects are applied for and that they are realized, so that people find each other from these different disciplines. But to make them a success, I believe we really need to consider more time, because it's very easy within developmental psychology to find a common ground, because usually we share a lot of method tools and we have some basic language like terminology that we share. But for instance, also social workers, they use the terms in a different way. And I learned when I say something innocently as developmental psychology in social work, it has a meaning. And then people start disliking me because they attach to what I said something else. So I believe it's really a translational topic and an intercultural exercise by itself, but for sure worth doing it if you're open-minded and if you don't mind the outcome, because maybe something else comes out what you thought. Most likely this will happen.
Can I just say, Martin, I'm reminded of a phrase. I'm reminded of a phrase by George Bernard Shaw, I think, or that we are divided by a common language. We use the same words, but have completely different meanings in different contexts.
Absolutely.
And that's why I'm trying to see how we can simplify the thing, have a shared understanding. That's why I was talking about the shared understanding of what education is, because I've been looking through the literature on this, and it's astonishing that the range of meaning attributed to education. And in fact, for some people, they claim that it's not a discipline in its own right. It's only an amalgam of various things, So you have, but basically, I like the idea that we are separated by a common language.
Absolutely, and to develop the shared understanding of anything, whatever it is, maybe education, maybe intercultural and democratic competences, is really a process. And what Martin said this morning, openness is key, because maybe at the end something fully new is the result, because nobody's original opinion will remain, because it gets changed over the process. But only if we are able to communicate and to overcome our differences or to find a compromise. But of course, sometimes it's also okay to say, okay, we just keep separate, we cannot find a common ground, and we acknowledge that we are different, and we try to collaborate despite those differences we discovered, without fighting with each other or without giving up the relationship. But I believe it's really, this is the true intercultural exercise for the scientists, the intercultural collaboration.
Yes, I would agree 100% with that, Dagmar. Thank you so much. I mean, I think we could probably carry on talking for about another hour. I've got other questions here, which I would love to speak to the three of you who are here. I also had questions for Roberto, but he had to disappear, I'm afraid, and wasn't able to participate in this. So, but we've already stolen over 10 minutes from Sonia's final slot on the program. So I think we're really going to have to wind up there. I would like to thank, the three of you who are here, Christina, Aidan and Dagmar. I'd like to thank Roberto in his absence, because he has such a crazy schedule, and we really appreciate him dropping in like that. There's also, Anna, Christina, if you can convey to Anna Perona our very great gratitude for the presentation that you shared with her this morning. That's fascinating to get that window into the activity of the Wergeland Centre. I think this is just such an interesting area. There is so much that we could be talking about, that we could carry on for a long time further. But anyway, Christina, Aidan and Dagmar, thank you so much. And I will pass the floor back to Sonia at this point.
Thank you very much, Martin.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you, Dagmar. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Aidan. And thank you, Roberto, who left us some minutes ago.